In 2001, Sega stopped making consoles forever, and every year since then, the young neckbeards of the world have clamored for them to come back and make another. What you probably didn't know is that you already got one. This is the story of Sega's Xbox. After the colossal failure of the Sega Saturn, Sega started looking for cheaper ways to build consoles so that they could focus more on the content. The Dreamcast used off-the-shelf hardware and even licensed Windows CE from Microsoft to run the software. Sega and Microsoft developed an optimized version of CE for the console, but Sega chose not to use it after the first few promotional consoles, including their own operating system on game discs instead. However, this was Microsoft's first move into the console market, and it wouldn't end here. After Sega was having initial problems selling the Dreamcast, the president of Sega went to Bill Gates to attempt to broker a deal between Sega and Microsoft. Bill Gates in 2000 was determined to enter the gaming hardware market in order to take shares away from rival competitor Sony. The talks opened up and led to an idea that Microsoft would buy Sega outright, the entire company. It was a very lateral move considering the work that they had done in the past, but there were only 3 companies at the time: Sega, Nintendo, and Sony, and both Sega and Nintendo were having financial troubles. At the end, Bill Gates didn't think Sega had enough muscle behind the name to take on Sony, and the talks fell through. During the development of Microsoft's own console, Sega was involved in the development at every step of the way, to the point that the original Xbox was going to be backwards compatible to the Dreamcast, even going as far as to announce that ability to the fans. However, Microsoft was not willing to allow Dreamcast games to have online support, which the president of Sega thought was integral to the experience of Dreamcast games. When he died in 2001, the new leadership at Sega was not as enthusiastic about the partnership between Xbox and Sega, and again talks broke down. When Sega closed its hardware development studio for the last time, the people behind the Dreamcast had to go somewhere, and Microsoft was keen on picking them right up and forcing them back to work. Some of the same people worked on both systems, specifically Peter Moore. One of the people that moved from Sega to Microsoft was former Sega of America president Peter Moore. Peter is a businessman that really has no knowledge of video games and even goes on record saying he doesn't care about them. Former gym coach that moved to Nike Advertisement, moved to Sega, then Microsoft, and now works for EA. He, however, knew how to get game consoles up to speed and was known for playing hardball with rival companies, a tactic that Sega had been known for the last 20 years. His business tactics led to Xbox being able to surpass Sony and would have surely done the same for Sega had they continued making consoles. Part of Moore's business tactic was to whore himself out to MTV and Pepsi. This is something that he had brought over from his tenure at Sega. The Dreamcast had been first advertised in America with MTV and Pepsi. This type of advertising campaign was something that neither Sony nor Nintendo ever really had and was instrumental to the success of Sega and eventually Microsoft's original Xbox. Because, let's be fair here, you didn't drink Mountain Dew until you started playing Xbox. Do you know why you didn't? It's because it tastes like sand. What you do find out, though, is that whoring yourself out to viral marketing works. As with any design process, Xbox then had to choose a color scheme for their consoles. And just like any other little brother that grew up under a Nintendo-Sega dynasty, you had to choose a side. It's clear from looking at both the Xbox and even the Xbox 360 that the color scheme design is very eerily similar to the Saturn and Dreamcast. It's actually kind of cute if you think about it. Then they moved on to the controllers. With Microsoft now building their own console, they turned to the only experience that they had ever really known, and that was Sega. When developing the controllers for the Xbox, Microsoft used the Dreamcast controller as a reference, using the colored XAYB scheme and the analog stick on the top left corner, even including adapters built into the controller heads. This turned out to be a bad decision, as the controller was part of the reason why the Dreamcast tanked in the first place, and led to Microsoft having to spend millions on rebuilding the controller mid-run. After the controller debacle, Microsoft really needed a win. And being new to the market, they didn't have any exclusive content from launch in 2001 or even for the next few months, with the exception of titles like Halo and Fable, which were originally intended to be on PC and then ported to Xbox. However, because they had been developing content for the Dreamcast, they had several titles that had been designed simultaneously for both systems. Several exclusive Dreamcast titles were ported and retooled to the original Xbox, such as the Shenmue series. Shenmue? One of the final things that Microsoft had to look for was a mascot, because all the other consoles had mascots. And one thing that Microsoft had counted on being able to use was that fast blue hedgehog, Sonic. However, once the merger fell through, Sega was actually no longer legally required to give up that character as an Xbox exclusive, which is why Xbox was the first of the new-gen consoles not to have a console mascot. It wasn't for lack of trying. They did try several times to obtain one, to include buying out Rare Entertainment and then just having them as code monkeys until 20 years down the road when they finally released Rare Replay. Good going, guys. The final addition to the hardware that was carried over from Sega's technology was online play and a dedicated system network to play on. Although originally against online support and in fact was the reason why the merger didn't go through, Microsoft eventually came to its senses and lifted the same software that they had developed for Sega to help build Microsoft's Xbox Live. And anyone that went to the announcement of the Xbox One knows that Microsoft's decision-making skills are about as solid as a pancake. Having them change their minds mid-sentence is just par for the course. But one of the best re-decisions in the history of that console. What? Oh, come on. That was a great analogy. Solid as a pancake. Yeah. You know, because you have to flip it. Microsoft is flip-floppity. Shut up. At the end of the day, Microsoft is now its own unique animal, but it's almost impossible now not to look at the Xbox and realize that they took the Dreamcast 2, painted it black like my soul, and called it their own, standing on the shoulders of a video game juggernaut in order to subside Bill Gates' personal rivalry with Sony. Thanks guys for watching my video. If you liked what you heard, make sure you comment, subscribe, and share.